everybody, and welcome to Decoding TA Tech Trends, Myth or Future of Recruitment. What we're going to do today is we're going to discuss some of the hottest trends in talent acquisition technology, as well as some of the what's new, what's next, cool tools, everything in between that you need to know in order to get caught up with the landscape of what's coming up in talent acquisition technology. I am very excited to be joined today by two of my close friends and outstanding analysts in this industry. I'd like to introduce first Sarah White, who is with Aspect 43. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thanks, Matt, for having me.
Yeah, Sarah, if you don't mind, just for those who aren't familiar with you, which probably isn't that many people, could you just give a brief overview of like what it is that you do and how you relate to the HR technology scene?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually a former talent acquisition leader turned industry analyst, and Aspect 43 actually researches how people use their technology and, more importantly, like why they're making decisions to buy certain types of systems and how these all roll back into improving the overall experience for our candidates, for our employees, for just the workforce in general.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here. And next, the one and the only Kyle Lagunas from Aptitude Research. Kyle, welcome.
Hi.
That is an intro. Kyle, tell us all about yourself and your journey to talent acquisition.
Oh, okay, that path. So, hey, everybody, my name's Kyle. I am the head of strategy and principal analyst at Aptitude Research. And similar to what Sarah does, we study innovation cycles in talent acquisition and talent acquisition tech. And our job is to make sure that we understand what's happening in the solution provider ecosystem and that it's actually working to solve the problems that you are tackling in your day-to-day jobs. I've been doing market research for close to a decade, and I even had a little stint on the practitioner side as well, leading talent attraction, sourcing and insights at GM. And then I also had some time on the solution provider side at Beamery. And I love this topic, so I'm really excited to get nerdy with everybody today.
Yay. You got a good nerdy group.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk nerdy to you all day, Kyle. So with that, just broadly, you guys have said that both of your roles sort of entail helping clients navigate the HR technology ecosystem. Sarah, what does that mean? What does that ecosystem entail in terms of scope?
Yeah, it's really crazy. When I first came into the industry in 1999, we barely had applicant tracking systems. And over time, I mean, I've seen the tech landscape completely change. Today, we actually research and follow 35 different categories of talent acquisition technology alone. And so it encompasses everything from sourcing and identifying talent to how we assess them, to going through and how we engage them through the interview process and hiring and onboarding them, and really everything beginning to end from a candidate's perspective. And now that also includes internal candidates. And so we've started rolling in more talent mobility and movement internally into these type of programs, specifically with TA.
Awesome. And Kyle, when a client, I guess, engages you or you start research on a vertical, what are some of the most important characteristics that you look for when you're kind of cross-comparing some more technologies? Talking about kind of that frame.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my big thing is always utility before cool factor.
Yeah.
I mean, Sarah, I'm sure that you've seen the same thing where there are a lot of really cool ideas out there. There's a lot of really neat stuff you can do with technology. But if we're not actually solving the real pain points of a sourcer or a recruiter or a talent acquisition leader, then what's the point? And so that's always where I start is like, well, what is this actually going to do? What problems are you trying to solve, talent acquisition leader? Are we trying to get more operating capacity out of our existing team because we're not going to get any more headcount? Like, that's the same old story we hear all the time, right? Or are we trying to, like, we don't have any dedicated resourcing or sourcing function, but we want to empower all of our recruiters to be effective sourcers. I'm like, okay, well, that's a specific thing. Let's dig in. So I always try to get to like the heart of what people are trying to solve for. And then that helps us to look through. I mean, it's a really vibrant, we'll say, solution provider ecosystem, and it helps to really understand like what are we actually trying to get done. And that's, I don't know. I think asking that question also forces one of the clients to think through and try to like really articulate what it is. And then I always like to validate too. I mean, one person leading a project, it's really hard for you to represent the interests and needs of everyone that are under you, all your stakeholders. And so I do also like to go that layer deeper and talk to some folks about, well, what's your day to day? Like how much, this is what I'm being told is a pain point. How does this translate for you, et cetera? Because there is a lot of nuance between the strategic goal and then like the actual solution, and talking to the people who are the ultimate stakeholders, what helps us to find like that path between those two.
And what's interesting, Kyle, is we do very similar work, but almost a little bit on opposite sides of the stuff. You spend a lot more time with the practitioner. We spend time with the practitioner in focus groups and research and trying to understand. And then we go back to the vendors to try to fix what they're doing, because as we all know, they don't always do the best job at marketing, selling, being clear with what they do, building the right type of products that people actually want. So one of the Insights of Work research that we just wrapped up, which will be getting published in about a week, we actually asked the question about what the decision factors are, like why people are buying. And we've seen a consistent shift to usability becoming the number one factor. People aren't buying new technology to save money. They're not buying it because of a feature or function benefit. They're buying it because it's usable. Both, it actually provides value, as you said, but it's also user-friendly in it. And I think it's something that as we get so heavily focused on all of the new AI and all of the new cool stuff, we miss at its core. If it's not usable and functional, it doesn't matter.
I think that was well said. So I do want to back up a bit to something that Kyle had touched on. Kyle, you said the first steps that you do when you work with the client is you work to define the problem. And it seems like that approach sort of bifurcates into a process issue versus like a platform or technology issue. Can you talk to me about some of the things that people are trying to solve with technology that might be more of a process or resourcing solve as opposed to tech?
I would love to. Right. Yeah, I would love to, especially because that is actually what pulled me into the solution provider side. I don't know how many of you have implemented a CRM solution recently, including something like Gem. But I think that there's this big misnomer when we purchase technology. We think that it's going to have an out-of-the-box solution. So CRM, candidate relationship management, is actually a strategy and it's an operating model. It's not just a piece of software, right? And so I think that's like the perfect example. We need CRM. And what they mean is we need a solution that can help us to capture touch points with potential candidates outside of an application interview process, whether that is at recruiting events, whether that is in LinkedIn chats, whether that's at a hiring event, like whatever those touch points might be. We need some way to keep in touch and track people. Like that's true. You do need a system that's outside of your ATS that will help you capture all those touch points over time. But you also need a more proactive recruiting operation that is going to like consistently and intentionally engage talent. And so if you don't have that kind of intentionality, if you're not doing that like process discovery and process design work, if you just go straight to buying a CRM, you start to implement that CRM based on what you think is going to be your best practice for pipelining. And if that's not actually how your sourcers and marketers and recruiters are actually working, then the CRM's not going to work, right? And we see it all the time. Like, I think that's the perfect representative. I don't know how many times I've talked to anybody in TA that says, oh, we have a CRM, but it doesn't work. Like, well, but it's not supposed to solve the problem itself. It's supposed to be the tool that you use to design your solution, right? It's supposed to be a core part of CRM strategy, but it's not. That's a CRM system is not the strategy make.
The tech amplifies that process.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to amplify the process in a bad process.
Right? Oh, sorry. I was saying it's probably the same thing for like interview tools. Like if you look at HireVue on Demand, we've had video interviewing for a long time, but like we need, to introduce some more efficiency into our interview process. But if you don't really design interview questions and best practices and help hiring managers understand how to make the most of an on-demand tool, you get candidates that get a bunch of fatigue. They're like, I'm tired of just like my first conversation is with myself and the questions aren't value add at all. They're not relevant, blah, blah. It's just any tool.
Yeah.
Sure. Sarah, go ahead. Did you have something?
I was just saying that any technology, whether it's in recruiting or employee experience or in financials, it's always going to amplify a process, good or bad. So it's going to make your bad process worse, or it's going to make your good process better. It's never going to hide a bad process. Unfortunately.
I think that's well said. So, Sarah, I'm going to start this one with you. One phrase that you both said a couple of times is best practices, right? And I find that to be sort of like consultant speak, a little bit nebulous. So at HR.com, we just completed our annual benchmark research on the future of the talent acquisition function. And I was surprised actually to find that the number one influencer or goal of the talent acquisition function among our respondents was actually to beat the competition within the very small market segment or industry, right? So
interesting.
Just how do I suss out what best practices are, particularly with a competitive subset? Like how do I go about doing that? And what does best practices even mean to you?
I think best practices is kind of a bad word. Like I hate the term best practices because it typically by that point means what everybody else is already doing. Best practices are amazing in HR. They're not as great in a super competitive talent acquisition and sourcing landscape. And so they're really good at understanding kind of where you're at on the curve. So best practices are like you're solidly at the top of the curve. Most TA teams and recruiting teams are trying to be ahead because they have to be getting that competitive advantage. So we actually ask a very similar question to that of broader than just TA. And we find that competitive number, once it gets down to CHROs and VP level, drops significantly beyond the core talent acquisition group. And the number one reason that they're saying they're buying technologies to improve efficiency, which at the end of the day, more efficient processes also makes you more competitive because you're moving the process faster. So, but when we talk about best practices, a lot of times it is really around just setting a rough idea of a benchmark, right? Like here's a rough idea of kind of where everybody else and what they're doing. And then it's designed for you to take it and adapt it to what actually is most important for your individual organization and team. But it gives you a starting point, right? We have averages. We are a society and just beings that like to put things in boxes. We like to have averages. We like to know roughly, right? Speed limit. Oh, we roughly should be going 70, right? Like that doesn't mean everybody's going exactly that. You're going above and beyond. I'm close to Montana. It goes fast here. So you roughly have these different guides that you follow. Benchmarking is no differently than those things. Some people are going to go faster. Some are going to go slower. It just gives you an idea of where to reach for. And the other thing that it does a lot of times is those are things that have been researched, tested. We have proven examples. We understand that it actually does have impact or provide value in certain areas. And so for companies that are a little bit more conservative or hesitant on certain things, going after a best practice is often a little bit safer for them to be able to implement and get pushed through.
I'm really glad that you kind of introduced analytics and benchmarking into the conversation. Obviously, I think every TA and people leader out there knows the inherent importance of data. Kyle, when it comes to like working, particularly on the buyer side, we talk about benchmarks, but what about the data to correlate the investment in these technologies with ROI or business impact? How do you advise structuring that, knowing that sometimes that can be an incomplete or corollary non-causation sort of relationship?
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, especially because if we have any sort of like data resource, like an analyst, like we want to put them on actual problems and not just trying to justify buying a new tool, right? One thing that I've always liked, rather than focusing on adoption, which is where a lot of people go, just like how many times have users logged in this week or whatever, I instead look at utilization. And so understanding how much faster we've been able to hire in key segments as a result of investing in a CRM, as an example. Like we bought a CRM, and this year's early career season, we performed X, and next year's, last year's we performed Y. We compare like how much of an impact did we actually make by utilizing this capability. Because let's face it, I don't think recruiters need to log into a CRM every single day. I think sourcers should, and marketers should be in there regularly. Like those are your pipeline functions, right? Your recruiters are actually trying to execute and actually hire. But utilization, I think, is really helpful. And then I also I don't see enough people when they are evaluating a new tool, getting ready to go and buy something. I don't see them actually benchmarking themselves and saying, all right, well, here is actually what our time to hire is actually. And maybe it's because it's hard to get an average across the 120 different job types that you have. You just focus on a key segment like early career, as an example. Like here's how long it takes us to sign an intern, how many interactions we've had on average with people before they sign on, whatever it is. Just trying to get a focused benchmark to model off of. I don't see it happening enough. It really is just like, I think almost more focusing on the problem set and then building the business case, and then going out, like getting permission to go out to market. Like that takes a lot of energy. Don't get me wrong, but because it's a rush to buy and not necessarily like an intentional assessment of current state, it is actually really hard to then back into ROI. If you don't really have the quant from the beginning, it's hard to get it later, further down the road. But even then, I want to underline this. It's really important to just focus on a specific thing. And I'm going to stick with early career as an example. It's just, you can't look at all of your hiring and all of your talent engagement and pipelining across your whole recruiting operation unless you have a bunch of data resources. Just focus somewhere specific. If we really want to get more female software engineers, well, let's just see how we are doing right now, and then how this intentionality and this resourcing makes an impact later. It's just getting really laser focused, I think, is a really important way to get to ROI.
I think the other thing to add on to that is, especially as we are in interesting economic times at many companies, to put it mildly, if we go back to what actually worked the last time we were going through this type of stuff, kind of the 08 to 12 range, one of the things that worked for a lot of people as they were trying to buy is they would pick out one or two metrics that actually had nothing to do with recruiting at all. What are metrics that we can look at that are happening in the rest of the business, whether that is retention, average performance reviews, anything cross the line, so we can see if anything that we're doing is impacting some of those nuanced areas that are much bigger, right, than from a non-recruiting perspective, so we can show the impact overall. We look at revenue numbers. We look at, like I said, things like performance reviews are really easy for HR to typically grab, and we can do correlations on those and kind of benchmark and track those over time as well.
Awesome. So I guess when you're taking a look at kind of the landscape right now, Sarah, you mentioned obviously we're in a a weird economic cycle. I don't know if I would compare it yet to 2008 and 2012, given like employment's still full. But all that said, obviously, not so much for the recruiting profession. Just talk to me a little bit about some of the trends that you're hearing about on the talent supply side, and how technology is kind of helping to either solve the problem of too many applicants, not enough qualified candidates, or vice versa, picking out that needle in the haystack who may be in a very competitive market, depending on where you're hiring. Where does technology play a role in this market versus, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, I think technology, especially in talent acquisition, always plays a role in this market. It just changes, and it's why we have so many different categories, because we have resources available if we have too many candidates, we have resources available if we have not enough candidates. There's technology really to kind of meet the needs of everything, because we're such a mature industry that we've already gone through multiple, this will be kind of the third potential recessionary cycle for a lot of organizations. And I think what's really interesting and what we're seeing this time that historically hasn't always been the same is that we are seeing that the experience of two different recruiters at two different companies can be drastically different. And so we ran a focus group, for instance, a month or a couple months ago, and we talked to a number of TA leaders at mid-market and enterprise companies, 1,000 employees and up. And we found very few of them were struggling with too many applicants still. But in certain segments and in certain industries, they have said they have been struggling with that for 2 years. And so the trends, I think, are going to be harder and harder to identify, because as with everything else that we're seeing around technology, how this is all impacting is going to be so much more personalized company by company. A large organization with a really strong brand is always going to get more candidates than somebody that is a smaller local organization that doesn't have a really big brand. And so even in the same economic conditions, their situation might be completely different. People that are looking for very specific types of roles are going to continue to be struggling. I think one of the big issues and challenges that we're going to see, quite honestly, and we're going to have to follow as a trend, is the return to work and return back into the office. I think you're going to lose a lot of really top talent, and I think it's going to shift the dynamics. And the technology is going to have to be able to kind of evolve even from where it's at to be able to support this in a slightly different way for candidates.
Awesome. So
can I jump in on that, Matt?
Oh yeah.
Do you mind?
Do Kyle? Yes. Yeah.
I mean, because you asked what are the trends that we're seeing? You're absolutely right, Sarah. Like if we look at one downturn versus another economic cycle, the one thing that I'm seeing that's a common pull through is that we have been in survival mode in TA 100%. For so long, and it's actually really having a huge impact on the mental health of the recruiting organization. If you look at the 3 years after COVID, everything was, the first 6 months, we weren't sure what was going to happen. We were all waiting with bated breath, right? But then it was everything was on fire all of the time, and the business was just giving us gallons of gasoline to put everything out. And then, oh no, it blew up even bigger. And we were hiring everywhere absolute crazy. And then your point here, Sarah, about return to office, this is one thing that really gets to me, because we were hiring at all costs and trying to find talent anywhere. And businesses were saying, you know what, it's okay if you're in Topeka, Kansas, and we're based in Toronto. We just need to find the best talent. But now business leaders and managers are trying to say, well, now you actually do have to come into the office. We're getting a lot of pressure, so you're going to have to. And all those engineers that we were told we could hire in Topeka can't move to Toronto. Right. And so all of the hiring that we just tried to get through has almost felt like a waste, because not only did we try to get as close to our number as possible and still fall short because it was impossible to get there, then we're also seeing our peers and maybe even ourselves being impacted by reorgs. Yeah. And then also we're seeing all this talent that we fought to get in the door not being able to stick around. And so it's just now the survival mode thing is just I think everyone is very change resistant right now, very transformation resistant, because I've been through it, right? I've been through it. I jumped through every hoop you told me to, and look at where it's landed me. So I think there's like a real trust challenge that the end user has with the leaders that's going to make it really difficult, I think, for new solutions to come into market, because you have to have trust in order to drive change. And I think that trust budget has been spent. We are deep in the red on that. And it doesn't matter how cool a new technology is now. If your recruiters, your sourcers, and anybody, if they're not asking for it, they're not going to use it. They're like, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. I'm just going to stay in my lane here and keep my head down. And so I feel like that's also like the big pressure, Matt, to your question. Like that's the big trend I'm seeing is 100%. Like people don't want new stuff right now. They really just want to keep their job. And they want to be left alone, and they want to have the same flexibility and trust from the business to do their job as they did when everything was on fire. And now that things are different, it's just like, when's it end for us? We're always on the chopping block, it feels like.
And I think what's interesting on top of that is there's this like trust factor, but there's also I'm tired of this and I'm not putting up with your BS anymore. And so they will walk out quickly, right? They'll find a new job and leave because they also don't trust you because you've proven that you're going to not you, but like a lot of the companies are not making the right decisions to enable them to do their job effectively. And so the trust factor, I think in a lot of cases is lost with the business completely. And it'll be interesting to see how it and if it comes back.
So one of the things you talked about is people aren't looking for anything new necessarily. And I'll drill deeper into that in a second, Kyle. But before we start, I just want to ask, so the average stack in an enterprise organization in terms of dedicated talent acquisition tools, according to the research we just did, is 13 on average. Again, that's a global average. Number may be higher, number may be lower. Question, are you seeing a move towards consolidation of the stacks, or are you seeing them become increasingly complex? Just talk to me a little bit about like what that looks like. Are we consolidating or are we buying more tools?
We're seeing forced consolidation happening. And
can you define that, sir?
Yeah, and so we're seeing, particularly with an applicant tracking system, we're seeing companies being forced into their broader talent management platforms, ATS, which is actually causing an increase of sales of all of the other point solutions to support it. Because many of the larger vendors have not done the work still 12 years later to make their systems ready and even like meet minimum viable requirements. And every time I go in with some of these certain vendors and I push back on this, well, a lot of times I just don't get invited back in. But the rest of the time, they're like, no, this is fine. Look at how many people are using it. We're still selling it. And I'm like, right, but everybody hates you, right? Like, what is the option here? How do we just make it viable for them to use? And so we are seeing a consolidation with some of the core leading to more sales and a broader tech stack of all of the other pieces. The other thing that we're seeing is a consolidation within talent acquisition to talent acquisition systems in general. So it isn't just an ATS. Our research this year for the first time found that a huge percentage of recruiters actually just believe now that an ATS and CRM is one combined system. They don't really even see them as separate systems, and they think they should just be one product, which I think everybody on this call predicted 10 years ago. It took longer to get there than we thought, but we're actually starting to see the numbers show that that has started to happen from a perception of buyers' perspective.
Sure. And so one thing I do want to just kind of drill down on is obviously recruiting, Sarah says, is moving much more towards like a TA sort of platform. I'm wondering, based off of the fact that we had some consensus at the beginning that we're going for simplicity and ease of use, why do you think the trend, Kyle, is from moving from TA platforms to like an ERP, which I think is what Sarah said, as opposed to moving to an existing technology like my marketing department as HubSpot? Why am I not integrating that direction?
I mean, it really comes down to how technology decisions are made. I think that what I see is typically TA leaders, even the most tech savvy, don't always have the most pull when it comes to HRIT or IT making a decision. We are really still at the mercy of, folks that are higher up the food chain or have more ownership of something like technology. Why we don't see more people going to resource like recruitment marketing with best of breed marketing tools, I think it has to do with data privacy and security. I think the people are just nervous. You have a lot more PII in much more sensitive data in an HR system, even a talent acquisition tool. A CRM might carry interview notes out of an ATS and see or just notes in general, depending on how people are using the notes field in the ATS, might pull over some things that you really don't want to have in a system that isn't as locked down as an HR tool is. But then I also just think it's easier to put all of HR technology spend into one budget instead of having licenses over here, and because that kind of defeats the purpose, right? If we're trying to move towards having just one set of licenses for all of our users across the board versus, all right, well, we're going to have 1,200 licenses, including all of our recruiters in our HR system. But we are also going to add 50 recruiting licenses in our MarTech stack. It just kind of fragments a bit more. And then also the other aspect of this might be a little bit nerdy, but you have those tools aren't purpose built for recruitment marketing, right? And so if you to get, again, some tech resources to develop those tools to be more specific to the use case, we don't have those resources in HR and talent acquisition. We might have some know-how. I mean, we know a bunch of really savvy, hacky people, but looking at building out an enterprise solution, having the hacking people people are a little wary of that. And so maybe it has some of the functionality that you would expect from a best of breed marketing tool. But I think between those two things, the need to actually build a specific solution and to make sure you have the data privacy and protection, I think it's a lost cause. If you can't get if you can't make the business case to get a purpose-built solution, you're going to struggle to put together a business case to build out your own bespoke solution. I mean, Salesforce has been around for a long time too. We haven't seen a lot of folks using Salesforce as a recruiting CRM or a recruiting.
They have tried.
And also some of the largest LMS vendors are built on Force.com. So
interesting.
So I think the other thing that's really interesting that we're seeing, we do a lot of work, and I personally do a lot of work on kind of tech that's emerging, product road mapping, everything else. I think what we're seeing instead on that side is companies looking at sales enablement software, marketing automation software, looking at the best in breeds outside of HR and coming in and creating these things. So I would not be surprised if over the next 12 to 18 months, we did see a huge increase in not necessarily new brands or new products, but new solutions within some of the ones, in addition to some new companies that really are ground built from the outside and turning it into HR functionality and recruiting functionality versus taking recruiting functionality and adding in some of the Marcom or FinTech type of pieces. And that it doesn't sound like a big nuance, but it's a nuanced difference that is going to have a massive, massive impact on the industry, I would say 18 to 24 months from now versus in the next 12 months.
Yeah, and I definitely am seeing that all over the place, right? That's why I get a bunch of calls as a technology company outside of the space. How do we make this into a recruiting use case? Which is a totally different scenario than I think we've seen in the past. So that, just kind of looking, and I know that we're getting down on time. I think it's been a good conversation so far, but looking at kind of the future. All right. Last quarter, HR technology VC funding was at its lowest level in a decade, right? Investment and spend was flat to down, which has not happened in about 5 years, 5 non-pandemic years, I should say. So if I'm looking at building a long-term partnership with the vendor, because obviously we're talking 3, sometimes 5-year contracts, who's still going to be around in
First
this
off, don't
like
do a 5-year
consolidation?
contract.
Yeah, probably very sage advice, right?
Don't do a 5-year contract.
So let's stick with 3 or 1 or whatever, but
3.
knowing you're making a long-term commitment.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways I can evaluate vendors to know that they're still going to be around and viable if the funding situation is slowed and the spend has slowed?
Honestly, I love going to Glassdoor. I want to know what their employees are saying, and I want to read what they're saying. I also read the responses, because a company that is super defensive about everything is probably going to be very defensive about everything that I bring up as a customer when I'm having issues, and be very dismissive about it. The other thing that you can do is actually look at the trending. And if things are low, but they're trending upward, I know it's kind of on a good track. If it's trending downward, we always ask. So I look at Glassdoor almost before every single briefing that we do or every single meeting that we do with a new vendor, just to get kind of a feeling from there. I think that first and foremost, the other thing that I always want to do is I want to talk to customer success teams. Sales gets a lot of credit in this whole part, and that's why you make the buying decision. But at the end of the day, your customer success person is who you're going to have to be engaged with, who you're going to have to be talking with. Getting to have a conversation with either who you're going to be assigned to or 1 or 2 different people to really understand how things are managed, what they are, what their knowledge level is, all of that is so vital for this product and this relationship to be able to last long term. Typically, when we see people unhappy with their solution, it's one of 2 things. It was either implemented wrong or the service is really bad. And right now, the number 1 reason people are leaving their current systems is integration. The number 2 is service and support.
Interesting. Really interesting. Kyle, are you seeing some more trends on the market?
Yeah, I do. And I love the idea of looking at a Glassdoor, because before funding even starts to slip, like the culture is starting to slip. People, go to a startup because they want the growth, and they actually usually are okay with a really dynamic environment. But yeah, it's a really good, maybe what's the word? Headwind? Anyway, one other thing that I like to think about is how customer oriented are they actually? I mean, do you feel like you can trust them? And so one thing that kind of always makes me a bit miffed or frustrated is on the practitioner side. There's so many times I hear people saying, "Oh, I can't tell my vendor that. Like, that's sensitive. Like, I can't tell them that. Like, that's sensitive. I need to keep that close." And I'm like, well, I get it to a degree. Like, there's not like antitrust laws don't govern like how open you can be with your, to a degree. You tell them, hey, I'm really struggling with adoption. Nobody's adopting. We've tried these 3 different trainings, but it was all virtual. Do I need to start doing in person? Blah, blah, blah. The integration is not working. I don't care if you build the integration or if they build the integration. It needs to be built because I was told in the sales process that it was an out of the box thing, right? And we know salespeople aren't always engineers, and so they don't know that it's not all out of the box. But I think it's just openness with your vendor. Like, how comfortable do you feel like you can be? And maybe finding some examples where you can be open with something that might feel sensitive, and just test it a little bit and see how responsive they are and how solution oriented they are with it versus taking advantage of it. I don't know. But it irks me, especially during the evaluation process or pre-evaluation, like before even going to RFP, what folks are willing to share. For example, we have a real morale problem on our hands here. And so I need this to really, really work. How are you going to do that for me as my partner? I don't see a lot of practitioners that are going out to market being willing to acknowledge, like, we've got a morale problem. How is this going to work? Like, they're just like, no, we can't tell them that. I'm like, you can tell anybody that. It's happening everywhere. At the end of the day, like, the tools are going to do, like, the technology is the technology, and like, it's going to have the same features and functionality, that's going to be there. Making it work is getting beyond just configuring this field name versus this drop-down menu. There's a lot more that goes into solution design than just configuration. And I think that the comfort level to be open in that partnership and communicating some of those less technical and more sensitive challenges, I think that's a real clear indicator of whether it's going to work for you or not. I mean, if I go back to your original point, Sarah, about the Glassdoor reviews, I would look to see how many customer success reviews there are and how frustrated they might be, because you might have a customer success organization that is really encouraged by and empowered by like helping their client. But if the engineering team is still just prioritizing new product, if the executive team is still prioritizing new product and not actually servicing existing solutions, existing clients, that's also, I think, a bit of point of concern for you. And your customer success like reviews will share like, my hands are always tied. We never get done what I know we can do this, or we oversold and underdelivered. Like, they'll share that stuff too. I feel like the customer success team is just probably the hardest place to be in HR tech startup land. It's just tough.
Real quick, you said something that I want to make sure doesn't get glossed over, but you mentioned the word partner. And I think that has been the biggest gap for most TA teams in buying technology, is they don't look at the vendors as partners, and not just the vendors that you actually end up buying from. Look to everybody that you're doing demos with, that you are talking to in the process, because coming in with a super regimented, this is exactly what we're doing, this is why I hate RFPs, this is exactly what we need, you're missing the opportunity to actually learn in the process. What has happened in the technology? What is new? What are some things that are, I hate to use the term best practices, but what are things that are happening for other organizations similar to you that you might not have thought of? They not only, like, you're really focused on your business and what you see, they look at hundreds of different companies a day as to what is and isn't working and the nuance for all of them. And so a lot of these salespeople, sales engineers, customer success people are highly, highly knowledgeable and experienced. Some of them suck, right? Some of them are horrible, but a lot of them are really, really good and can be super consultative to you no matter what stage of the process you are in, if you are open and honest and willing to be transparent with them through the process.
Awesome. So we only have a couple minutes left, so hopefully we can get to these answers quickly. So looking at the whole, I guess, field here, if you had to choose one category that HR practitioners are overly focused on from a technology perspective, and one that you say this is going to be a game changer over the next 5 years or so, what should I believe the hype in, and what is just buzzwords and BS? Kyle, I'll start with you.
Please let me. And this might be a hot take, but there is this obsession with skills-based everything that is just driving me up a wall.
Yeah.
Until we have job architecture that is skills-based, until we have a people strategy that is skills-based, we don't need to be doing skills-based recruiting, because people don't sign up for a skill. They're not applying for skills, they're applying for jobs, right?
And using a resume that doesn't have skills.
Right. And I think people, a lot of candidates get frustrated even with evergreen job postings, because they find out they're not actually applying for a specific job. They're just applying to be considered for anything there, and if you look at software engineers in the IT organization versus software engineers in the product organization, they're very different types of software engineers, very different mindsets, very different cultural draws, and work styles. And so it's skills-based is just, I think, it's probably coming out of the World Economic Forum, where all these rich jerks are thinking, oh, that sounds great, we should all do that. And it's then HR is yeah, we totally could. It's just I see it. 1 minute left
now. I'm going to throw that to Sarah. I could listen to you talk about that all day, by the way. But in the interest of time, Sarah, what do you think?
I'm going to say on top of that, because I agree with you. I think AI.
Do you think AI is going to change?
No.
Or it's overhyped?
I think it's a little bit of a hype right now, because everybody is talking about it in a way. First off, it's clear they don't understand it. Most of the vendors don't seem to understand what it is. Definitely a lot of the practitioners, and for sure these career coaches on LinkedIn don't understand what this is at all. And so I think what we're seeing is we're going to have AI fatigue, similar to what we did a couple of years ago. What is coming that I'm super excited about is the recruitment enablement type of technology. And so the things that are very similar to what we see in sales enablement and completely out, that is going to be a game changer for recruiters in this industry.
And that was awesome, because with that, we're down to our final 10 seconds. I'd like to thank Kyle and Sarah for joining us, as well as everyone who took the time to tune in. And a big thank you to Jem for making this possible.